So let's talk about these lymphatic vessels. So they look a lot like veins because, like veins, they are returning fluid from your tissues back towards your heart. But veins are part of a circulatory system, which goes in a circle, right, along with arteries and capillaries. Lymphatic system is one way. It begins at the capillaries and it ends when it dumps fluid back into your veins close to your heart. Pretty much wherever you have blood capillaries, you're also going to have lymphatic capillaries. So that means there are a couple of places we don't have blood capillaries, like in your eyes, right? Feeding the tissue in your cornea. And that's because we don't want to see red all the time. We don't have blood capillaries. Our tears deliver oxygen to those cells. But we also then don't have lymphatic capillaries. Your text also says that we don't have lymphatic capillaries in your brain. But there's been some new research that indicates that you might actually, and that it might actually be important in terms of draining away wastes from your neural tissue and preventing diseases like Alzheimer's, for instance. In a lot of ways, these capillaries are similar to blood capillaries. They are thin, they're single cell layer thick in terms of walls, but they're different for a few reasons too. They're not a tube because they're not part of a circulatory system. They're a pocket at the very beginning because they are the beginning rather than a continuation. And they tend to have larger diameter walls. So not thicker, but larger. In fact, they're a little thinner because they often don't have much of a basement membrane, meaning the connective tissue that attaches to them. And they're kind of flattened or irregular, and they overlap in these interesting ways. And they form these flaps, the cells that connect to one another. And what that allows is when there's a lot of fluid and large stuff in your tissue fluids, it pushes in, and it allows those fluids and those large chunks of things in. Big stuff can't get in your blood capillaries, but big stuff can get in your lymphatic capillaries. But it can't get out, right? Because if it's pushing out, it pushes these flaps together. If it's pushing in, it opens this flap. Works almost like a valve. And that's important because not only is fluid getting pushed into these pockets, which turn into tubes, right? Cellular debris is junk, old dead bacteria, live bacteria, viruses, things like that are too big to go into your blood capillaries, go into your lymphatic capillaries. Also, as we'll talk about once we get to the digestive system, some things that are too big to be absorbed through your intestines into your bloodstream get absorbed through your intestines into your lymphatic system, like fats, for instance, lipids. But all of this means that the junk that's in your interstitial fluid is able to leave, get taken somewhere else, and cleaned out. In that way, the lymphatic capillaries and the lymphatic system sort of work like a sewer system, right? We have these sewers on the side of the roads that when there's a lot of water, when it rains or something, the water runs off into the sewers. But it's not just the water, it's all the other crap that's on the street, right? Your old newspapers and your motor oil and your actual literal, pet feces and bird feces and whatever else. So this kind of is the sewer system of our body, and it takes it away to get treated before it re-enters our circulatory system, just like our sewers take that water to be treated before it gets put back into the Ohio River. So lymphatic vessels look a lot like veins because they face a lot of the similar challenges to what veins face. They are returning blood from your tissues to your heart, right? So from your tippy toes and your abdomen and everywhere else. And they have low blood pressure, right? Because they're not connected to a pump like a heart. So you have very little pressure and you got to go up against gravity sometimes. And so how do your veins deal with that? Well, they deal with that using valves. So just like in your veins, you have these valves right here where if fluid gets pushed through here, all right, they open and let it through. But if fluid gets pushed backwards, these two pieces of the valve get pushed closer together and they don't allow backflow of fluid. And just like with your veins, you have sort of a skeletal muscle pump and a respiratory pump. Whenever you move, right, your muscles and flex them and relax them and flex them and relax them, and whenever you breathe heavily, right? That squeezes these vessels and squirts the water forward. And again, your level is saved, essentially. The water won't go backward, the fluid, because of these valves. And so not only is exercise and movement important for your venous return, it's also important for your lymphatic return of fluids. And so there's a lot of research now that says not only is it important to exercise, frequently, but it's not necessarily good enough to just, exercise for 45 minutes or an hour during the day and then sit for 10 hours, right? Because during that 10 hours, you're not getting any return. You can get clotting in your veins, things like that. So there's a lot of research that says now it's good, exercising an hour a day is good or whatever, but getting up every hour or so and walking around for a few minutes just to get your blood flowing, increase your lymphatic return, is pretty healthy. Your lymphatic vessels are placed some superficially and some deep. Superficial ones are just in the subcutaneous layer right beneath your skin and in your mucous membranes and serous membranes, which also have deep lymphatics that are kind of down within your skeletal muscle and your other organs. And you have these placed strategically to allow fluid to come back from the major ends of your body, your arms, your legs, your head, your abdomen. And you have a lot of lymphatic vessels in your abdomen because, as I said, they're important for the absorption of fats. And your capillaries come back together to form these collecting vessels. And these collecting vessels will move through lymphatic nodes to clean out the fluid and combine into lymphatic trunks, which come back kind of from major areas of your body, like you have subclavian trunks that come back from each arm, and you have inguinal trunks that come back from each leg, etc. And then the last and largest vessels are ducts. So the trunks will all empty into one of two major ducts, and these ducts pour the fluid back into the subclavian vein. And you have two main ducts, a thoracic duct and a right lymphatic duct. The thoracic duct collects lymph from both of your legs, from your abdomen, from your thoracic cavity, and from your left arm and left side of your head and neck. The right lymphatic duct gets fluid from your right arm and the right side of your head and neck, and that's about it. So clearly these two are not equal. Your thoracic duct has to deal with a lot more fluid return than your right lymphatic duct. So it has sort of a collection reservoir called your cisterna chyli. So cistern is like a big empty tub for fluid, to hold on to water. The cisterna chyli holds on to lymph that comes back from your intestinal trunk and your lumbar trunks, and then also from your lower limbs, etc., etc. And this is what that cisterna chyli looks like. You can see these lumbar trunks coming from each side of your back, and intestinal trunks coming from your abdominal cavity, and it all dumps into this cisterna chyli. I want you to know that structure. And then from there, it goes up this long tube called your thoracic duct, and then dumps into this left subclavian vein, right as it's sort of becoming the brachiocephalic vein. Now, on the other hand, your right lymphatic duct is literally just this tiny little piece, right? So this isn't it. This is the right subclavian trunk, and this is your right jugular trunk, right? But they come together to form this tiny little right lymphatic duct, which enters your right subclavian vein right as it's about to become your brachiocephalic vein. So the thoracic duct is much bigger, handles much more fluid. The right lymphatic duct is just this tiny, short little thing up there. If these lymphatic vessels get blocked for any reason or damaged, you can have difficulties returning the fluid, and you can end up with lymphedema, which is swelling. Edema is swelling. And you can see this in certain limbs. For instance, this is an example of someone with lymphedema or elephantiasis of the foot has caused blockages. I know Kathy Bates, I don't know if you know her. She's an actress that was in Misery and a whole bunch of other stuff. But she had breast cancer and had to have a bunch of her lymph nodes removed, her axillary lymph nodes, along with her breast to get rid of the cancer. And it saved her life, but it also got rid of a lot of those lymphatic vessels, and so she needs to wear a compression sleeve around this arm. She often gets massages to improve lymphatic return, and she's a big voice discussing lymphedema. In terms of lymphocytes, the cells, there are really three main groups: T cells, B cells, and NK cells. And these are involved sort of sequentially in cell-mediated immunity for T cells, antibody-mediated immunity for B cells, and something called immune surveillance for NK cells. One thing that lymphocytes all have in common is that they are all sensitive to specific antigens. They all have antigen receptors, which are molecules that are on the outside of their plasma membrane that are a certain shape that will bind to a certain shaped antigen. And antigens, as we talked about with the blood cells, like A antigen, B antigen, Rh antigen, all of these are molecules that are found on the outside of every cell that's out there, right? Every living cell has antigens, glycoproteins, etc., that are on the plasma membrane, whether you're a human or a plant or a bacterium or a virus even. Everything has certain molecules on the outside of your cells that we call antigens. Our blood cells have A antigens, B antigens, Rh antigens, but there are lots and lots of other antigens out there. And your lymphocytes will only respond to specific antigens that you might find on particular bacteria. And when they do, they will sound an alarm and cause a counterattack. But it would be like, if you had like a guard on the outside of a fort or something, or a bank, and they only looked out for specific people that wore yellow shirts and snatched purses or something. I don't know. And the yellow-shirted purse snatchers, if they ever see them, they'll go wild, and they actually multiply themselves so that they're clones, and they'll form these big attacks. But if you're, green-shirted, right, and you're stealing wallets instead of purses, well, then what do they care, right? So it's very, very specific, and it has to do with a physical interaction between an antigen on the outside of a cell and an antigen receptor. And if they happen to physically match, right, then we'll have an immune response. So we said that T cells are involved in cell-mediated immunity. And there are really multiple types of T cells. The first type that really are involved in cell-mediated immunity are cytotoxic T cells. And cyto means cell, and toxic means deadly. And these are literally like cell killers. They will directly go attack a bacterium or a virus or a cell from a foreign body, like a parasite, and they will kill it through direct contact. Cytotoxic T cells. Helper T cells don't actually physically directly attack any sort of cell. They're sort of the generals. They stimulate other T cells, like cytotoxic T cells, to divide and attack. They stimulate B cells, which we'll talk about in a moment, to make antibodies do what they do. They run the show. So they are particularly important for your immune response, but they don't actually kill anything themselves. And then in addition to cytotoxic and helper T cells, we also have suppressor T cells. And these are the ones that sort of call off the attack at the end. Once the war is essentially over, right, and you beat back the infection, you don't want to keep multiplying these cells and making more antibodies, and that's energy intensive, and it can also damage your body if you're doing too much inflammation, for instance. And so you need these suppressor T cells to sort of cool everybody down and inhibit these T cells and B cells. B cells are important because they make antibodies, which we'll talk about later, but they are essential for beating back serious infections. And the final kind of lymphocyte are natural killer cells. Very cool name. And they go around checking cells to make sure they are not either foreign cells or that they're not your own cells that have become cancerous or been infected by a virus, in which case the natural killer cell will kill them naturally.